Thank you and welcome. My name is Daniel Stillwell. I'm the editor of the IFTA Family e-newsletter, and today we have Dr. Katie Heiden-Rootes. She is a professor and a clinician in St. Louis, and I wanted to have her talk about some of the work that she's been doing. But before we get into that, Katie, what kind of mental health practitioner do you identify with, and what does that look like in your context?
Yeah, I think I have two identities at this point. One is in my original training as a couple and family therapist, and the other is training that came later in sex therapy. So I'm a certified sex therapist through ASECT. And those two worlds don't always meet. And so I find myself kind of ping ponging between the two, figuring out what each need in terms of informing each other. And so what does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a associate professor at St. Louis University. I run a community counseling clinic through there, as well as teach and mentor students and do research. I have a private practice here in town in St. Louis. I'm known mostly for couple and sex therapy. That's who comes. A lot of couples struggle with sex, and so that seems to be who walks through my door for various reasons. And what's happened to me is what my mentor told me would happen, which is the community finds out what you're good at and they send people.
Yeah.
You know that mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been doing that since I got here in 2015. And so it's grown over the years, but I try to keep it not too overwhelming.
Okay, awesome. Um, a couple years ago, you helped create the Family Clinic for Queer and Trans Youth at St. Louis, and their mission statement is they work to provide financially accessible, culturally attuned therapeutic care that helps foster and support safe, loving, and affirming families of queer and trans youth. So I wanted to ask, why did you try to put this out into the world, and what kind of work are you actually doing there?
Yeah, so that clinic is run through the community counseling clinic that I'm the director of at St. Louis University. And what happened was that I had a bunch of very excited, passionate students about working with queer and trans youth. The other contextual issue here in St. Louis is a real lack of um, professional attention to the system, to the family. There's a lot of psychologists, there's a lot of social workers, and there's a lot of professional counselors, and all of them still are very driven by an individualized diagnosis, and are very much driven by individualized services.
Mm.
So if you look across St. Louis and you look at who's working with queer and trans youth, there are lots of people doing the work. They're offering group therapy, they're offering individual counseling services. And then there's sort of this attitude about families as either problematic in some way, or problematic actually seems to be the dominating,
All right.
or sort of separate. So if mom and dad have an issue, they need to go here, kid needs to go here. Oh, there's multiple kids, each kid gets a therapist. I did a consultation. So out of the clinic, what happened was the community found out I did this work. So I do consultation now for different agencies in town who work with these folks. And I just say the same thing over and over again, which is you have a family problem on your hands, right? I know the kid's suicidal, I get that, but they're suicidal because mom and dad have rejected them. And so I'm trying to shift this idea of parents as only a problem, or this diagnosis of depression or suicidal behavior as an individual issue, as opposed to a family level problem that can be addressed, because parents might be the problem, but in my world they're also the solution.
Mm.
And so if we don't engage them as the solution, as important, as significant, I cannot replace a parent for this kid.
Right.
You just can't. I can be a pseudo parent, I can be maybe a mentor in some ways, but I cannot replace what they go home to. And so I was interested in both creating a place where families could come and we could engage them that way. But also I wanted to change the dialogue in St. Louis about what are we really doing and what do these kids really need. And so as part of starting that clinic, we have a specialized children's transgender clinic at a university here at WashU. So I engaged them right away because they see these kiddos all the time. and have been working with them, and then other places, so that we become sort of this network. And then me and my clinic can become a voice about how we're really framing this systemically, around these kiddos, and thinking about them as, vulnerable people living in contexts that we need
Hmm.
to address. That was my hope in 2018 when we started talking about it, and then in 2019 when we started offering services to the families.
Wonderful. Yes, and I think that the international people that will potentially watch this, a lot of them have more of a collectivist mentality, that recognition that systems and infrastructure need to be prioritized,
Mhm.
that we in the West have often forgotten.
Yeah.
Um, uh, Part of a lot of this is also, I think, appropriate to talk about right now because we are celebrating Pride in a lot of different contexts. What role do you think mental health practitioners in the States, anywhere, have in meeting the needs of queer folk?
Yeah. So I I I've done some research on experience of queer and trans people in therapy, and with their therapists, right?
Mm,
So I think what came out of that research was how important the person of the therapist is, where we show up, how we are with them. So some of them talked about like um, having their therapist come out to them, right, as lesbian, gay, bisexual, whatever. And that being one of the most affirming moments for them, that they were sitting with somebody. And even if they didn't share the exact identity, this person might have a clue at least about how hard this is, or important this is to them. Like
mhm,
why, Pride was based on celebration of coming out. So like having a therapist come out to them was like kind of cataclysmic. Now these are also like queer folks who are from religious backgrounds. So in religious contexts, in those settings, being out is a dangerous thing. And I
mm,
know some geographic areas, some different countries, that's also the case. Um, the other thing that was interesting out of the research was, as much as being proud and positive about their gender or sexuality, they also talked about like kind of wanting to be left alone. Like, don't
mm,
require I come out. Like, let me sort of stew in this, particularly in a therapeutic context. Don't sort of like um, turn coming out as like the healthcare outcome or the health outcome we're after. Like, it might not be health for me to be out. It might be
mhm,
dangerous for me to be out. Or I might not be ready. Like, I haven't reconciled my religious or spiritual beliefs with this identity. So let me struggle here with you openly and in a positive frame, not in a like disparaging or conversion therapy frame, but
mhm,
in a I'm okay. Let me just explore this. And so many of them said like kind of just I called it struggling openly, and finding freedom to do that, to not to be required to be any which way. And so in that way, for me, the research was a reminder of like the therapist's role in terms of being affirming also means sort of being with in wherever they are, right, on that journey of understanding themselves, if we want to use that language.
right.
So I guess in a therapy context, I think about that. I also think about like I remember early on as a therapist going, I need to come out like as affirming openly, like in a on my website to people I talk with. Um, and depending on where I am, there's varied reactions to that, right? About I worked with somebody once who was like, well, but if somebody wanted to change their sexual orientation or gender identity, wouldn't we have to do that as therapists? And I was like, no. What?
Right. Right.
Mm. Because we haven't investigated why they want that or where that's coming from, right?
So
So
even the idea of coming out as an ally, even if you can't identify with the queer community, you can still out yourself as a specific kind of supportive person.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So like I see therapists do all kinds of things. Like I see them show up at Pride as their professional self, like with a booth or with a whatever. We partnered with the Children's Trans Clinic, and we're passing out flyers about our stuff there with them. I think community partnerships are really important in this work if you're going to be like the other really interesting part, we have a group here in St. Louis called the Metro Trans Umbrella Group, and they you can only get on their list as of approved providers if somebody in their organization has worked with you and vetted you.
Ah,
You cannot
okay.
you cannot self-declare, I'm an ally. It's like,
Yeah.
well, you might be, but you might also like really mess this up, and not know it, like out of ignorance, not because you have necessarily bad intent. So there's also that part where you have to begin to position yourself as somebody who needs to be vetted if you are not part of that community, and be okay with, I mean, outing yourself, yes, as an ally, but knowing that you probably have work to do in order to really earn that title, I guess,
Hmm.
for lack of a
That
better word.
role in the community,
Right, right,
because so much of this is still based on patterns and of trust.
right.
So, okay. Is there anything else you'd like to share with either what you're doing or something else that you think the reader, viewer, people might be interested in?
Yeah, so one of the main activities, let's say, of our clinic, is we offer family groups. So when I was first starting out as a family therapist, I did, we had group therapy classes and people talked about family groups, but I'd never actually seen one. And because I wanted to be sort of family oriented, and I think there's real value in being with families at different places and learning how to be sort of a community together, we set up, I made this up. So this isn't like researched and vetted, but it worked really well. Where um, we had one night a week, 5 to I think 7 families was our max, who came, and the whole family would meet together for the first few minutes. We'd do a mindfulness exercise, which was the mindfulness exercise was always about parent-child connection.
Ooh.
So we'd have parents and kids, I would make them face each other. The
Mhm.
kids hated this, and the parents loved it. And these are all adolescents, right? These are 12 to 18-year-olds, and they'd have to face their parent. There'd have to be some physical contact if they were comfortable with that. We had several kiddos who were on the autism spectrum, so touch was, a tender thing. So if they didn't touch, they had to at least face each other, right, and have that kind of one-to-one moment. And then we would do either a visualization. One night, one of the students, I would have my student therapist plan it, like each of them would get a night where they would get to plan it. We had a chocolate one where they would have to sit with chocolate and then
Mhm.
taste it, but they'd have to face the parent and then open their eyes and sort of smile at them. So we had all these like, not, I mean, I consider them an intervention, but I don't think they knew it was for the
Sure.
first few minutes. And then we'd have parent and kiddo separate, and we talked parent stuff and we talked youth stuff. And so we would do that for like 2 or 3 weeks in a row. And then we would do mixed family groups. We do
Mm.
3 families together and 3 families together, but the youth had come prepared to share something. And so we would sort of empower the youth to share what they wanted to share about a relationship change they wanted with their parents. And then sometimes it would go really well, and sometimes there was cataclysmic conflict, as you might imagine. But
Yeah.
that was the point, right? To put it on the table, and then have 2 therapists in each group sort of managing it. And what was fascinating was watching the youth intervene with the other youth. So,
Oh,
like, there were multiple times where there would be conflict, and one of the youth would go, I don't think that's what your mom was saying. And I was like, right? Like, what is more powerful than that?
yeah.
Than
Peer
another,
interventions. Awesome.
yeah, it was amazing. And so, like, I had no idea how this was going to go the first time, but it was like, it was so beautiful to watch. And it was sometimes very emotional, as you might imagine. And then, we'd go back to the parent youth sort of separate for a while. And then the parents would come in after processing what all had been shared with them, with their own sort of desires for the relationship. It was always relationship driven in terms of what they needed to come with, not behavior driven. So
Hmm.
they were not, parents were not allowed to come in and say, you need to clean your room more often. No, I wish I was more connected with you. I
Yeah.
wish we talked more. So there was this, I again, much like the whole point of starting the clinic was, we need to get people back on the road of relationship focused, sorts of vulnerability about what they want, as opposed to this sort of very transactional, because one of the things I've noticed with queer and trans youth in particular is the parents get so focused on like the identity that they forget they're dealing with a whole human, right? They
Right.
forget like this is just a person in need of your love and affection. I
Mhm.
understand bothered by this, but still your kid. And so I remember like that was a big part of the parent work was remembering you know this kid, remembering you love this kid, remembering that they have all kinds of other quirks about them that are still there, even after they've come out and this has been hard for you or a transition for you. So
Right.
I think COVID hit and it just freaking blew up a bunch of stuff. And we tried doing it on Zoom and it was okay, but we really sort of, I can't wait to get back this fall and like start another group and get back to the in-person work because it was just so powerful.
Yeah. So much of what people struggle with gender and sexual diversity is that identity and connection. And
Yeah.
so going back to that over and over is so powerful. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm sure that people enjoyed this, and I hope to see you at one of the conferences one day.
Yeah, that would be great. It's good to talk to you.
Bye.